I'd like to explore sex from the paradigm of flow and explore individuality from the paradigm of flow, which is also, in its duality, the paradigm of flow and resistance. So within the paradigm of flow and resistance, here's a couple of the things to consider around individuality, sex, and transcendence. So the first thing is, what is flow? At its core, it's initiation and yes. It's how about this? And the answer being yes. Now, within the paradigm of duality, there are always at least one voice, but really at least two voices within the psyche. And so sex with self, you can think of in terms of a momentum of flow, begins with, how would you like to do this today? And the answer being a resounding yes. Friction or block is, you have to do this today, and the other part saying, I don't want to. So the first thing we need to work with is creating flow within ourselves. And this ties in with a map I created on integrity, on integration, because we can be completely divided on just about every topic, or we can be unified. We can form alliances that propel us forward. So the first step is, of course, to get flow within ourselves. And there are numerous dimensions upon which to create flow. There's the flow of the physical body and pleasure. But there's also the pleasure of the mind, the flow of thoughts. For example, the symmetry of an idea. This idea has integrity. It has flow. If you create another idea pattern, this way, this way, this way, or this way, you've got friction. There's no flow. Now, what's interesting is how this intersects with consciousness. Because think of a light bulb and think of electricity. You have flow occurring. An electrical current is running invisibly within a wire. And the current is running along, and you take it inside a glass tube, and it's still running along. But you create an interference pattern, and it lights up. You get awareness, you get consciousness. And so with flow, you have grace, but a predisposition towards unconsciousness. The more friction you have, the more conflict, the more resistance you have, the more consciousness you have. With pain, you have impact. You have a lot of consciousness. With flow, you have an effortlessness that leans towards unconsciousness. And like everything, if you think of a thought as a light bulb, energy is passing through, it hits an interference pattern, a paradigm, a belief, something that you've created through language, through distinction, and the energy lights up in that pattern. And you have, aha, I have a thought. Energy is passing through, a thought emerges in the interference pattern of the flow and the resistance, the capture of some of that flow into an energy system called a paradigm, called a thought that fits within the paradigm. And as soon as you put the thought into language, now you're conscious of it. And language is an interference pattern. Language is an interference pattern because it never fully captures the symmetry of the energy it is capturing. And you can kind of look at it like time. If we say that this is a clock, well, then these are seconds. But the second does not fully capture time because there are an infinite number of gaps between each second called milliseconds. But a millisecond doesn't fully capture time. It's just a tighter staccato punctuation, and there's infinite amount of time between each millisecond. Then you have a millisecond of a millisecond, and a millisecond of a millisecond of a millisecond. But you can never capture the fullness of time, which is why you can have a moment that feels eternal. And you can have another moment that you didn't even notice. You can have hours go by and I have no idea where I was or what was happening in those hours. And you can have a moment that is eternal. Because whatever your observing and measuring device, a second, an hour, a month, a year, 10,000 years, you mark the space. You mark the points at the end of space, but you do not fill the space. And this becomes particularly clear when you think of vertical time. You know, in dreams, for example, you might have a second, but the second isn't moving linearly. The second is moving vertically. It's going way out and way back. And so this second seems to take a week in your dream because you've changed angle. That's the nature of an altered state of consciousness. You've altered the flow from this way to this way, or to this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then this way, and then you come back to the point and you continue. And then what about the depth of time? You have an infinite amount of volume that can fit between any lineal dot and any lineal dot in time, because it does not capture the full dimensionality in which time occurs. And the degree to which we experience that dimensionality is to the degree that we are operating and measuring, observing and measuring X dimensions of time. And so we have 2 points bracketing time. And we notice the points. And words are like points. There is an infinite amount of energy going back and forth. We notice some of it. And as we notice some of it, we say that's colorful. And that's a rough texture. And that's an interesting point. So our attention goes to those points on the energy continuum. Because every word is a bracket. But there's infinite amount of energy that's taking place between the words, within the words, within the multiple meanings of words. It's one of the reasons that poetry is so rich, is because it opens the doorway to dimensionality. And it's one of the reasons that artists are more valuable dead. Because there's nothing so juicy as waiting till the artist dies and then getting 100 art critics together to all weave elaborate stories about what the artist meant. Now, this is usually done after the death of the artist for the simple reason that if you brought the artist into the room, they wouldn't agree with any of them. You'd have 100 different versions all saying, no, this tied in with this girlfriend in France. And then you'd have the artist saying, no, that wasn't it at all. That wasn't it at all. I had a dream that night. It reminded me of this. I don't actually know why I did this. That bit, I ran out of paint. Then this came in. Then my assistant spilled some ink, so I had to white that out. That's why I did the face, right there. And then all the other, all the critics are furious because it's ruined their narrative. So it's wonderful to wait till the artist dies, hopefully without explaining exactly what their art means. And now the art is a portal. It's a portal that no one can own the portal. You can't own the portal because the artist is dead. And so if you want to come up with a weird theory about this and that and the other, no one can stop you. And this is the value of the art as a portal to possible meanings, to probable meanings, to interesting connections about probable meanings. And it creates a mystery. Now, we live in an either-or paradigm, and so with an artist alive, creating a bit of art, the artist could say, well, this is my story. And the response could be, well, your story is no more or less valuable than any other stories. Because the value of an art piece is its doorway into the infinite meanings. And if that were allowed, then living artists might make some money. So the value of a doorway is how many places it can take how many people. That's why a poem is so beautiful. It doesn't make sense. There are large gaps. The hat fell down the wall and opened to a loud sound. Ah. And in the silence after ah, in the circle that went on the head of a nobleman now dead. So those are pretty big gaps between those words. There's a lot of space for energy to come through. And it's worth noting that our chauvinism, the emphasis on the yang and the de-emphasis on the yin, the overvaluing of the yang, the under-emphasis of the yin, is such that the feminine, in its grandeur, in its supreme dominance. Now you look at it scientifically. We measure a proton and an electron in relationship with one another. And then we measure the space in between the two is vast. It's like 99.9% of all that is space, even at the atomic level. And it is the space between that is the feminine. It's no wonder that we ravage the earth so violently, trying to hold on to the little shreds of masculinity within the vast oceans of presence, of possibility, of space, of silence, within the infinite presence between 1 second and the next. It's no wonder that we read books so furiously to feel like we exist, rather than sublimating ourselves to the ocean, to the void, to the silence, to the rhythm, out of which we came and to which we return, once the finite point of a single body, of a single structure, dissolves again into the chaos of the surrounding ecology. Now, when we talk about sex, we're talking about flow at a certain level, or a pattern of flow and resistance. I want to touch you like this. When the answer is yes, you have flow. And I want to talk to you like this. And when the answer is yes, you have flow. And I want to look at you like this. And when the answer is yes, you have flow. And I want the environment to be like this. When the answer is yes, you have flow. Now, you have sex within the egoic consciousness, which is the personal encapsulation, meaning what the individual does to a large extent is, start off learning from parents and learning from people around and watching movies. For example, someone might watch a James Bond movie and say, oh, I want that kind of flow. And that kind of flow seems to be happening like this and like this and like this. So I'm going to develop those traits, those presentations. And of course, in the movie, there's a yes to that. And so the movie flows. But the sex only occurs mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, verbally, if there's a yes with the person you're connecting with. And so attunement, initially to the programs of the cult, the programs of the culture, the programs of the parent, is the default program. Because when a large mass says, be like this and you will survive, the answer of every child is yes. Unless so much pain comes from the yes that there starts to be a growing sense of resistance. There's sympathy. And then as you move into the teenage years and into adulthood, if you have a safe environment, there will be antipathy. And then there will be synthesis. The infant is unconditionally sympathetic. The infant is hungrily drinking in the facial expressions of both parents, is exploring the full range of their energy and noticing what the parent is saying yes to, and what the parent is scowling about, what the parent is enraged about, and what the parent is confused and overwhelmed about. And the parent, as the first representation of the culture, the parents are saying yes and no, yes and no, yes and no, yes and no, 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 yes, no, 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 yes. And the child is in the feminine position of needing survival, needing security, needing love and belonging, and finding that point to say, yes, what do I have to do before you'll take care of me, before you'll love me, before you'll make me a member of this family? Well, you're a boy. No boy like mine cries, so stop crying. You're my boy, and no boy of mine cries. Okay, I've got to block that one. What do I do? Well, you try out the different things, and it's like, oh, that's my boy. I have to be like this, and like this, and like this, and then I get to belong to this family. That's right. And of course, we don't take responsibility for training this as an induction, as a psychic massacre of sorts, in which 75% of the psychic terrain within that child is decimated, if not more, 80%, to find the little windows of acceptability. We don't go to the bathroom like this. We don't talk like this. We don't feel like this. We don't dance like this. We don't sing like this. We don't kiss like this. You don't walk up to someone like this. You don't talk like this. Even language, to bring down the infinite probability field of all sound into these tiny little staccato reverberations called meanings and language. And then we don't have words for large spectrums of the energy. It's like, what's the difference between the love of longing and the love of sacrifice? And the love of sacrifice like this and the love of sacrifice like that? What's the difference? Just have one word, love. We try and patch them together and capture some meanings. But what if the whole culture has a blind eye to this domain? How do you patch together a meaning when nobody agrees to look that way because it's taboo? We don't do that. We don't talk about that. So it doesn't get to exist. So you do not get to exist in that domain. Because if you exist in that domain, we won't talk about you. Which means you won't exist. Which means you don't get to meet your third level of human need, to love, to be loved and belong. You have to be like this and not like this. So if you have those parts, keep it secret. So the child comes into the feminine with the parent in the masculine role. This is very sad in a chauvinistic culture because it means that the infant is automatically viewed to be less valuable in their consciousness, in their presence, in their influence, in their opinion, than the parent. Which is why we don't consult children about things like education. Even at 10 years old, they're not valued as much as when they're adult and school is all finished. So there's a lot going on around this intersection of flow and resistance. Now, the stronger the resistance, the first thing that emerges is awareness. The next thing that emerges is conflict and friction. The next thing that emerges as energy intensifies is overwhelm and pain. And if you put two masculine energies in intense opposition, I want to do this. Well, I want to do this. Well, think of it in a car. You're driving along happily, and the car stops in front of you. You become aware of it. Someone's in my way. I want to go through. Well, they're not letting you through. Well, I want to go through. If that builds up. Or two cars meet on a one-way alley. Who's going to back up? If nobody backs up, the bumps get more and more violent. And with that jolt, with pain, comes consciousness. With flow, comes grace and ease, but also a certain unconsciousness. You're not as aware of your body until someone hits it. Suddenly you're aware. What was that? Something touched this part of my body. What was it? What's going on? And then you define, that was another hand that touched it like this and is doing this for this reason. Now you suddenly have exploded the consciousness. The quality of the sex is the amount of consciousness with the number of dimensions in synergistic collaboration in flow. When one person says, "Do you mind if we dim the lights?" and the other person says, "Yes." When the other person says, "It's a little chilly here, can we turn on the heat?" and the other person says, "Yes." The other person says, "I like to be touched with this kind of intensity." And the person says, "Oh yes, that's perfect for me." That's the perfect kind of intensity that I like to touch and be touched as well. Now, yes happens on multiple levels. Now, you can say yes verbally to all of these things, and you'll note that when two people are attracted to each other and meeting early on, it almost doesn't matter what the other partner says. It's whatever it is, whatever you want. Yes, I'm a yes to that. But if that's going on and the words are out of sync with the body and with the feeling, then the body may start to tighten, which is a form of saying no. I've been inside women where from the moment I enter her, the thigh muscles are like steel. She's saying yes, but her body is saying no. I'm blocking that physically. Mentally, it's hard to know what's going on. Could be a complex algorithm. Could be a coping mechanism. Could be an appeasement out of fear that isn't even conscious. Because the yes can happen on multiple levels. There can be an energetic yes and a mental no. My mind says that the kind of person that I should be with wears different clothes than you. My energy says, wow, I love who you are. My heart says, I'm numb. My thought says, you're the type of person I want to interact with because of this and this and this. So I've got a culturated mental program that says yes, but my heart is numb. And maybe the path to opening my heart is blocked at numerous points with the mental program. For example, in order to thaw a heart, you may have to cry for 3 or 4 hours. You may have to induce your partner into tears for 3 or 4 hours. But the mind says, according to our culture, that is weak. And the mind says that which is weak is less valuable. And the mind says that which is less valuable is discarded. And the mind says, I don't want to be discarded. So what are you doing trying to make me get emotional? What are you doing? Cut that out. Yes, I'm numb. That's my right to be numb. I'm not getting emotional. Don't fuck around with me and throw me away, is what the mind is saying. And the heart is numb, waiting for the kind of warmth that can penetrate those frozen personas, days, months, years, decades old, that were locked up in an ice chest and put away because the emotions that they brought forth did not fit the pattern that the cult could say yes to. So they were bundled up, the freezer door was closed, and out in the cold they go. And you go numb. Medusa, the feminine, covered in snakes. The myth, to look straight at Medusa is to be turned to stone. It's to be frozen in the feminine by the direct communication of trauma, of the reptilian brainstem. It doesn't get any clearer than that. Frozen in trauma. Because when we have needs to be loved and to belong, and some part of our heart threatens those needs, we freeze that part of our heart. We turn it to stone. And once frozen, it cannot move. And then we guard it, like a dragon guarding a treasure trove that it cannot use. A dragon doesn't spend gold. They don't eat gold. They just guard it. The dissociated brain is guarded by the dragon, by the reptile that will not let us touch the gold until the environment, once sociopathic, once threatening to evict us for owning that gold, is conquered, until the environment that threatened our death by the eviction from the tribe, the Aborigines in Australia, they don't bother in some tribes to kill their Aborigines. If someone crosses the line of the cult and steps outside the circle, there's a pronouncement. This person is no longer in our tribe. They no longer exist to us. And everyone turns their back and refuses to acknowledge the presence of the one who has stepped beyond the pale, beyond the line. And after being ignored, after being invisible, they curl up and die. We understand as pack mammalian species that to be cast out of the circle, to be unwelcome at the table, is to die as a pack mammalian species. We have no more protection from the herd. So we will throw out the parts of our psyche that threaten to lead to our eviction from the circle. We cast them out so that others will not cast us out. And in doing so, we split the psyche. And in splitting the psyche in so many different ways, we preclude the possibility of flow. Without the possibility of flow, we have no transcendent sex. Maybe it's all in the mind. He looks cute. I've got nothing better to do. He's wearing the right shoes. He can fuck me in this way. But just for tonight. And not in a way that interferes in any of these other areas. These are the little boxes that I make available. In the snooty arrogance of a curated box that takes a divine probability and reduces it to a lawyerly transaction curated by a Western brain. The seat of power, for most Westerners, lies strongly in their mental programming. The problem is, it's at odds with the body. Many of us have horrible relationships. What we tell our bodies to do feels horrible. And what we tell our bodies not to do feels great. So we have a split between thought and body. If I can just get through the day, if I can just get this promotion, then this will happen. And then if I can just do that, then that'll happen. And I'll do all these things that I hate doing. So that then one day this will happen, and then this will happen, and then I'll have money, and then this will happen, and then I'll do what my body enjoys doing. And the body's constant complaints, sorenesses, tirednesses, fatigues are viewed as the enemy of the mind's adaptation strategy. The level of sex is determined by the integration of multiple dimensions. Mentally, emotionally, and physically. And through those three primary colors, politically, sexually, energetically, spiritually. I mean, you can reduce all of those down to thoughts, feelings, and body. But the more dimensions that are created, and what about the sense of beauty? The more dimensions that are created, the more there is the possibility of flow or resistance. And of course, disgust is the antithesis of flow, which is why to treat someone and behave as if you disgust me, not just in what you think here or what you said here, no distinction. You disgust me, usually meaning the arena of the curated mind. The presence is much more nuanced. And of course, it's an internalized and externalized relationship. For someone to disgust us, the parts in ourselves that are represented, I mean, the idea that other human beings are just completely different than us is a myth. It's absurd. 99% of the human being is very, 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 very similar. The brain, the mind, is probably the most diverse. I like blue, you like red, I vote this, you vote that, I like this movie better than that movie, you like that better. You know, so the brain is very diverse. So it's easy to see, okay, that's different. But just think of the fact that we all think and how unusual that is in the multiverse to have a measuring device called thoughts. And everyone has thoughts. And everyone has the three primary feelings. Everyone has a body. How amazing is that? I mean, there's so much that's common. Well, your body is too fat right here. And yet, to feel that way, there has to be some fat in one's past, in one's present, in one's future that you're terrified of, that you're fighting and resisting. Or you don't even notice it. You have to have a certain resistance to something to have antipathy, which means you've got to have a relationship with it, which means you've got to relate to it inside in order to have antipathy. So the child starts as the total yes. Well, the child starts off whole and is gradually pushed into compliance and seeks compliance to survive, to feel secure, to have love and belonging. Now, there's a phenomena called merging, and there's different levels of merging. There's the merging when you meet someone in a very strong flow that is conscious, meaning I really like kind people and you're incredibly kind. I really like energetic people and you're very energetic. I really like being touched just like that and you're touching me just like that. And we're sympathetic in these deep flows. And in those deep flows and in those sympathies, there's the sense where I can't really tell where I end and you begin because we're sympathetic. And so you have this overlap. You also have this dynamic, whether it's in tension or in flow, there is always a third energy that is born between two people. It's like two waves in a pool. I'm making a wave, you're making a wave, and the waves interfere. And a third wave is created in the interference pattern. The third wave is always more complex, which means it has a bigger probability field than the first two waves. Whatever your wave is, this is my wave, okay, this is my wave, and those amplitudes meet in the water, a third wave is born. Sometimes multiple different waves, multiple different things at different points as it intersects with the boundary of a pool. And if the two get perfectly aligned and you create a standing wave where you have this phenomena where the waves seem motionless because we're both doing the same amplitude from different ends of the pool, the energy meets, the troughs align, and you have this phenomena of standing waves that don't seem to be moving, but in fact are in perfect rhythm as they meet. You have a resonance emerge in that standing wave. Now, here's something else that's going on, because we're looking at the flow and friction points between two people. And in this case, they're all lining up quite nicely. There's tons of flow. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different dimensions of flow happening simultaneously. Well, that's a lot more interesting than just one dimension. So what would one-dimensional sex be? My mind is in love with you. You're the perfect person for my mind. My body doesn't like you much. It feels like you don't know what you're doing. Okay, but whatever he wants to do, whatever she wants to do, my mind, this is the perfect one. Fine, whatever, the body doesn't matter. My feelings, I'm just happy with my mind saying this is the perfect one. And I know he's the perfect one because he went to school here, and he voted this, and the perfect one does that. And so it must be the perfect one, and so therefore it's the perfect one. It's a self-referencing loop within the mind. But my body is a little uncomfortable. I don't really feel myself. Now, strangely, this other person who is completely off the wall, I laugh, I open up, I flow like this, but they are definitely not the one. Well, of course they're not the one. They didn't go to this school, they didn't do this, they didn't do that, da-da-da-da-da. You know, their bank account isn't the right amount. It's either too much or it's too low. They're a rich jerk or they're a poor slob, whatever it is, that's not the one. But, oh my goodness, this part of me just flows. I remember the conundrum of a woman who made me laugh 700% more than any other human being had ever made me laugh in my life. I was constantly laughing with her. Constantly, with, every 30 seconds, laughter. And it made me think. Because she was uncomfortable with intimacy. She was puffing away on cigarettes, which I can't stand. And she was lying through her teeth, which I've never lied to a partner or friend. Never. Never cheated, never lied. There she is. It's like she's inventing stories as she goes along. It's almost like a little crank, It's like, it was just terribly funny. But it got me thinking that if the laughter dimension is flowing 700% more, but my mind is not terribly happy with this. I mean, how can you have a relationship based on trust if someone's lying every few minutes? And so the question is, well, how do you relate? And which is more important? Would you rather go through your life laughing with someone living in a fantasy world? Or someone who's very serious and unpleasant, who never lies? Is there an objective basis to say that one's better than another? You see, I think it's much more of an algorithm, because in every dimension, this is the dimension of laughter, 700% increased flow. You could call it the highest sex of my life on the laughter dimension. Had a similar situation in the Philippines, where I was single at the time. I was trying to date. And by the time this woman finally arrived for the date late and this, I was so mad at her. I said, look, this is not going to work. I'm on time. I do what I say. And, it's hard enough, this is not going to go anywhere. And I felt it was really important to tell her this, because I hate having physical sex on false pretenses, and it seemed like it would be a really, rotten thing to do, to be that clear that I'm not going to see this person again, and then, have sex with her just because I enjoy sex, and then tell her later. I mean, that just seemed like a shitty thing to do. So part of when I say I never tell lies to a friend or a partner, part of what, I mean by that is I try and include the other person in anything I think they'd want to know. And so I said, this is not a good relationship for me. I can explain that if you want, but I don't want to string you along. I don't want to woo you or anything. I mean, I don't want to give you mixed messages. So this is not a good relationship. However, if you want to have breakfast together, I just want you to know that. And if you want to leave now or whatever, I mean, just know that and do what's best for you. and she wanted to stay. And then she was texting, and that irritated the hell out of me. It's like, what? So I'm sitting here with you, giving you my attention because you want to, and then, I mean, it's like, you go be with the people you're texting. Go be with them. Go. Just, I'm not going to be rude to you, but, it's like, I'm not even here. And we're already clear this isn't going anywhere. And so I said, by all means, go do that. And she didn't want to do that. She put away her phone. And after breakfast, we had a hug, and I felt all this energy going through my body, and it was amazing. And I said, it's amazing, all this energy going through my body, etc., etc. I'm really attracted to you. But I don't want to hurt your feelings, be rude, any of this and that and the other, and I'm quite irritated by this and that and the other. And she said, that was fine. And she liked my body too. Well, as you can tell, we're in another country here, where certain things, the American ego couldn't have withstood the first criticism, which is why I felt it was important to voice it rather than operate under false pretenses. Well, I'm in another culture with different flow points and friction points. An hour later, we were making love. And again, there's this phenomena, 500% increased flow. And of course, now I'm more divided because I'm still clear. I don't like late people. I don't like people who text. I don't like, I wasn't keen on the fact that she had a number of children. So there would have had to have been a pretty strong flow to overcome the various logistical difficulties as there was. And later that evening, I had some of the most transcendent, energetic sexuality with this woman. And then, right after that, she had to go and ask for some money. And it's like, what is this? Is this, her son had a medical emergency. I said, is this one of these scams? I have no idea. But I've just had perfect flow at a lifetime high. Meaning, I've spent time with 100 women, give or take. And this just off the charts. And instantly, and in complete dissociation with my mind. It's like, how do I process that? I don't like this. I don't like this. I don't like this. This is off the chart. What do you do? How do you bring those together? And for me, I don't know what to do other than to just honor that as a profoundly surprising and amazing gift. And to have humility for the fact that I clearly do not have a paradigm big enough to balance and measure all of these things. I didn't have the paradigm big enough to anticipate that someone could make me laugh 7 times more than anyone else in my entire life. You see, and this is the trouble with online dating. I eliminate all smokers. So I wouldn't have met the woman who made me laugh more than 700% more than any. I wouldn't have met the woman because she would have been out of that filter. And I think I'd be a terrible father with my travel schedule. And I don't want to abandon any child. So I have on my filter, I don't want to have kids. Well, this woman said she didn't have kids in her profile. Then it turned out she did. I wouldn't have met her either. And so, and then we don't have a cultural placeholder for sacred experiences that last a day. Because how can you not call something that profound a sacred experience? And yet the mind says, well, if you're just getting together for sex, it's not very valuable. That's the culture saying that. What if it's the most valuable thing in your whole life? But it doesn't fit within the boxes of those words. So this is the grief of the unmarked, unrecognized faces of soul that come and present themselves, that bear witness to the continual repetitive abandonment, betrayal, judgment, and numbing out of large segments of who we are, that we do not know how to honor within the observing and measuring devices of our mind. It's a tragedy. And sometimes we open to that grief, and someone will take us near that grief because we see that there's a big oasis of the psyche just beyond the judgment that stops us going there. And we wander in the desert within the maze of our limited minds, seeking perfection in a way that it cannot come, and feel empty and hollow. Where is my true love that will not present the key that fits the lock that I've created on my heart? Where is that true love? And I want to honor that grief here and honor the miracle of my wife, who didn't come through any door I could see either. In fact, I was so certain from the first email exchange, I was so certain that my wife was completely inappropriate that I didn't even want to have a date. I was going to cancel it. And then I saw her in a meditation. I'm like, what the fuck is going on there? This I couldn't ask for a more inappropriate person. And then I thought, well, there's only one thing my mind can imagine that could happen here that would be appropriate. And it's this. Here's a young woman who wants to meet me. And maybe there's some way I can help. So as a date, as a wife, no. But maybe my meditation is not limited to looking for a date and a wife. Maybe there's a way I can be of service and help this person. And so I said to myself, okay, one date, and let's get clear. I'm not going to set myself up for frustration and disappointment. We already know this, So let's be clear. I'm doing this as an act of service to the universe. And that's what I did on the date. I asked my now wife, I said, tell me what's going on in your life. She told me. I said, any problems? She told me. And I said, well, let's spend this time trying to be useful. So I went through a list of technical things that she could do to fix those problems. I gave her one of my books that I'd written. And I said, does this seem like a good response to your problem? She said, yes. So I said, okay. And I just, this almost never gets followed through on because people don't like advice, particularly in America. So I said, if you've done this stuff and it's useful and you want to let me know how it goes, Phil, here's my email address. And I thought nothing of it. A week later, she'd done it all. Life had improved. Advice was all taken. She'd read the book. Useful. So I said, okay, well, we know what this relationship, it's about me being of service and being helpful. So, okay, so how can I be helpful now? Well, she had this problem and, okay, so do this, 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 and this. She did that. Life cleared up. I said, okay, fine. As long as I don't have to fight this woman, I'll give her as much advice as she wants. Period. That's what this relationship is about. So, pretty soon we're in a dynamic. She emails me every day. I read, give her 5 to 10 minutes of advice. She goes out and spends 2 to 6 hours a day doing it all. Her life is skyrocketing into good shape. I spend another 5 to 10, 15 minutes the next day, just taking off. It's like, I never anticipated that. That wasn't on my list. I've never met a person who grows that rapidly. I've never imagined someone would actually take my advice after hundreds and hundreds of people saying, oh, interesting, and not doing it. I take my advice. My life takes off, but other people, they've got better ideas or procrastinate or who knows. So her life's shooting off. It's nice to have to make a contribution to someone else. So we have had this amazing flow point. Again, it's 1,000% bigger. 1,000% bigger in this flow of being of service and receiving and growing. Well, pretty soon, this feels great. I'm impressed. I'm admiring her. I don't grow that fast. It's wonderful. It's like, wow, it's so nice to be around someone who's just caring enough to do the work. And then it also really upset me. Here's a woman who's willing to work this hard, who with 5 minutes a day just takes off, and no one is mentoring her. No one is doing anything but tear her down. That is such a crime. And when you find someone that excellent, it's a crime to waste that resource. So, I committed more and more. When someone stole her phone, so it blocked that flow, I just got her a new one. And it's like, okay. So we've got, and I was also fed up with the fact, well, I won't get into all that, but you have these off-the-chart flow points that can be kernels to deepen into other realities. And ultimately, the way I made peace with it is I'd rather start with someone who has none of this stuff on my list, but is moving in that direction at several 1,000% per year, than I would someone who's stodgy and blocked and all that and has most of the things on my list and it just isn't flowing. They're not growing. That's what I'd like. And that's proved to be a very incredible thing because our relationship and marriage has just been on this beautiful up curve constantly. There's no honeymoon period and then it's just constantly getting better. Who knows when that ends? But that's a pretty nice dynamic to be investing in and working hard to grow for both of us. And then I've discovered that I grew and I wasn't expecting that. Like, how's this person going to teach me? Well, it turned out I learned a hell of a lot from teaching her. Well, I wasn't expecting that either. I would teach her this and this, and then I'd watch how happy she was doing that, and then be like, oh, I want to do that too. And so, so I ended up growing. Not as much as her. So that's kudos to her. But a lot. Now, sex deepens as we add dimension, as we add flow, as we add energy, as we have humility to open up into new possibilities. Sex deepens. You find a new dimension. And there's this other dynamic, which is that we are part of a larger ecology. Energetically, emotionally, spiritually, as our bodies, we are part of a larger ecology. And there's this thing called transcendent sex. So there's two forms of transcendent sex at different levels. The first is when the flow is strong enough and dimensional enough that it becomes a resonance, like a chord, where you have 3 or more intense flows. And by focusing on those, you move beyond yourself and into the relationship, into the third energy that's bigger than the self. And that's this form of transcendence here. And once you have the relationship, the discipline of transcendence is putting the relationship ahead of the self. It's like being 2 halves of a boat, both of which would sink on their own. And once you understand that can fit together in these perfect ways, the boat is seaworthy. And as a seaworthy vessel, where you can travel is vastly bigger than where you can go as just half of a sinking boat. Therefore, the relationship is more important. The boat is more important than either half. The synergy is more important than the ego on either level. This is me. And so one of the reasons that I've changed in big ways, like I didn't used to be able to sleep touching someone. I just couldn't sleep. I'd be restless, and so, but Jen had nightmares and regressed to a young age at times and needed to cling. And I thought, let's invest in that. Let's put that first. Let's love that terrified little girl. So that's transcending. My body has this reaction, my history, But this is more important than saying, well, I don't like touching people when I'm sleeping in bed. No, this is more important. The relationship is more important. And the relationship will grow if that terrified little girl finds a safe oasis at night rather than having to listen to some, crankety adult saying, this is my line, don't cross it, and dividing the emotional depth. Because a nightmare is a pretty strong energy. So if you can partner with that nightmare, you bring that energy into the relationship and now it can be an ally. And it's part of the reason she's grown 4,000% and counting. So then I shift. Well, then I have to get to know parts of me that are bigger than my little small parts that have their little preferences. Like, no, I don't like that. But that's a pretty small part of me. No, I don't like that. And that's final. Okay, that's a little small part that doesn't want that, and that's final. But what about the part that wants and honors the relationship and is willing to make sacrifices for certain things? Well, that's a bigger part. It's a more mature part. Well, I actually learned what it was like to be an adult. Amazing. Didn't learn that from all these small parts and their preferences. I learned that from being of service. Oh, what a gift! To be initiated into adulthood and not even see it coming? My goodness, this is what it feels like to be an adult, to actually be responsible for something bigger than myself. Wow. Who'd have thought? Not me and my little box of check marks and stuff. Would never have guessed. So, there's this space for humility. Now, the first is then to sacrifice aspects of the limited ego to serve that which is bigger than the limited ego, which is the third energy of the relationship, and protect it. Fiercely, consciously, to subjugate the ego to this. And there again, she was a great student, so she joined me willingly in this process of submitting to that third possibility field. So, all kinds of disciplines. Making sure the house was fully equipped with everything to make her feel at home in her best parts. Supporting her skills, doing this, setting things up so she could do this, working out every difference so that there would be a place for what's best in her to grow. Oh, you don't have a notebook? Okay, I'll get you a notebook. You don't have this? Okay, we need that. We need an easel for your painting. Putting all these things together so that all of her can come into the space. My job. So that's part then of being of service. And I can't say how grateful I am. I can't say how grateful I am to stumble into reservoirs of greatness that I didn't know were there, because no one had ever received them before or needed them. And I think this is a little bit akin to what parents feel when they understand that their child's well-being in a healthy parental relationship is bigger than their own. But what we have is a tremendous amount of flow. And it's a flow that had to happen in another culture. Because in American culture, my wife is losing social rank every time she receives a gift like this. But that's just our cult. It's just one of 10,000 cults in human history, and it's a terrible cult. You look at the track record of relationships in America, the depth of emotion, the depth of integrity, the depth of honesty, the depth of addiction, the depth of abuse. They are terrible metrics. So you don't want to learn from American culture. And it's a young culture. So Asian cultures are bigger because they're older. Most Asian cultures are thousands of years old, not 400 years old. And they're more feminine, so there's more flow. The masculine is the resistance. So you have a good masculine dynamic with two Americans. Well, I want this. Well, I want this. And so you just fight in the masculine. You don't find Americans saying yes, and yes to that, and yes to that, and then feeling proud of themselves for saying yes, and proud of themselves for feeling. That's all feminine. Low rank, chauvinistic cult. But in other cultures, to say yes is high ranking. And so you have the point of flow. I still have my cultural bigotry from, years of humiliation and shame for not every American wants a confident, masterful man who knows what he's doing, who knows everything, who does this, who has the money, it's all about that. And then they're going to try and compete, and then you got to have some flow, and it's all about valuing the masculine in men or women. It's not where the magic is. The magic is in the flow. So you have the level of transcendence of the individual to honor the third energy that is born out of both people. That's the first form of transcendence. But what about this larger transcendence? What about the fact that we are all part of the ecology out of which we were born? We're just one of many species born out of this planet. And we're just one of many energies born out of an energy probability field. And what about all of these magnificent, symmetrical, and beautiful energies that are part of our probability field as a species, but are not being realized in any cult at the present time, in any culture? Or that we don't fit easily within our current ego? What happens when we say yes to an energy field, to a pattern, to a belief system, to a paradigm that's bigger than ourselves, that is not being mirrored in the cult around us? What happens when we say yes to that? It's a form of sex. When we say no to that, it's a form of resistance, a form of consciousness, a form of self-definition, and often a form of suffering. That's not how we behave in this family. But that's how the universe is flowing, but it's not how we behave. Well, that's how the universe is flowing. Well, then I'm a no to the universe and I'm a yes to my way of doing it. Okay, well, you can fight and work hard on that battle for a while and you will become conscious. Because the river will keep flowing against that bank and you'll have to keep reinforcing it and spend a lot of energy doing it. And the river will keep flowing. You have to reinforce it and it'll keep flowing, reinforce it, keep flowing. So there's a battle going on, and that battle leads to awakening. We become very conscious of ourselves. And yet this ties in with Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi, I forget the exact pronunciation, in his book on flow. Because the happiest human beings are people who get so involved in an activity that they lose their sense of self. In the experience of transcendent flow, they lose a sense of time, they lose self-consciousness, and they become part of something bigger than themselves. And that's the happiest that they are. You could say that they are in sex with the universe, in sex with the energy field. The universe is saying, how about it? And the person is saying, yes. I'm a complete yes to exploring the physics of this, to coding this computer, to writing this book. You know, authors talk about this in the creative process, and almost all great authors and composers talk about the fact that at their best, their creativity is sex with something bigger than themselves, that they are not writing it, that they're talking and seeing what happens. You see, and there's moments even in these videos when there's an ineffable gateway. And as I open to it and let words come into formation that flow in that gateway, then it's no longer me. I'm communing with something bigger than myself. And I've got more energy coming in than is going out, and I leave the creative process more energized than when I began. Versus other times when I have specific points to make, where I'm going to make this point, and then I'm going to make this point, and then I'm going to do this. Oh, gosh, it's exhausting, but I've got to finish this point, because I had that system, and it's mine, and this and that and the other. And I leave the place completely exhausted, but I got my point across. And it's a completely different experience. And yet, it's just the same thing. I'm sitting here talking in front of a camera, drawing a few things. But the one I'm opening to something bigger than myself. And of course, the ego doesn't always know where to find that because it's bigger. You see, that's the underlying harm of trauma. When you traumatize a child too many times, it becomes terrified of the unknown because the unknown is vulnerable. And within the vulnerability of transcendence is also the vulnerability of being re-traumatized, re-abused. So I'm never going to be traumatized again. I'm never going to let someone hurt me again. I'm never going to do this. Also means I'm never going to face the unknown. I'm never going to open up to the ineffable. I'm never going to go to the edge where I can have sex with something bigger than myself and feel the energy flowing in beyond my, where I have control, but the only thing I'm doing with that control is saying yes, yes, yes. Yes, I like that too. Fine. Yes. You see, and that's easy. That's energizing. That's transcendent. Of course, having an image in meditation and trying to get my mind up to speed is a bigger yes to the unknown than saying this person doesn't fit everything on my list, so I'm saying no. And of course I have mixed feelings about that because there's been other times when I've had a vision or meditation or something and I thought, okay, that must be right because I had a meditation. And it's like, I have no idea what I'm doing with this person. What on earth am I doing? I don't know how to open to that yes. I don't know how to fit, because when you don't have a certain humility and sensitivity to new things, if you say yes to something that's unknown, but you go about it in the same normal way you would go about based on a series of assumptions that don't actually work, then your paradigms and your assumptions prevent you from realizing the probability of that unknown situation. And then there's varying levels of responsibility and irresponsibility. There's nothing more irritating than someone who has a $3,000 rental check due and they're just going to trust the universe and not pay their rent, and it's like, yeah, I don't want to be one of those, it's like, it's like, so how do I, and this is the friction point with the unknown energy. It's like to say, no, I'm not going to not pay my rent. No, I'm not going to not have savings. No, I'm not going to go into debt to do this and that and the other. But if I can say yes in a way that's responsible, that bit I'll say yes to. This other bit, I don't see that. This bit's okay. So there's this dance with the known and the unknown. And the nice thing is that if you're just a complete yes to everything, like a child who never experiences any pain or shock or boundary, you're not conscious. And you may be in heaven, and it's kind of like that journey where you return to the place that you began and know it for the first time. Meaning, you're born divine and in flow with the universe. And you spend the first 40, 50, 60 years fighting it to varying degrees and getting really conscious. And at some point you realize, here's a bit of the universe I can flow with, and here's another bit, and here's another bit. And now I'm back into this flow. But now I understand what the alternative is, and I'm appreciating the flow. Because I can contrast it with spending decades fighting the flow. And so I know it for the first time. I know it. The little limited ego me knows what I had at birth that I didn't know at the time because this bit wasn't developed. And so there's this dance with the tussling. And it's one of the reasons that I think fighting is so important. Because often you need to fight with something before you respect it. And the ultimate understanding is that you're fighting with yourself. This part of you is little box ego over there that has this culture and this thing, and this bit of you has this. It's like different parts of the body groping and fighting and trying to find what's this and what's that. Why don't you do it my way? No, my way. And it's like, oh, we're part of a larger body. We can cooperate, but you have to find out what's going on. And so often a good way to begin a relationship is as honorable enemies. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to cheat. I'm going to do what I think is the right thing. I'm going to try and convince you. I'm going to get to know you. You're my enemy. You're different. You want to do it this way. I want to do it this way. You want to vote that way. I want to vote this way. But as you get to know the enemy and you can expand to something bigger, say, wow, there's a probability field that has a place for both of us. Meaning we're part of a bigger body that has room for a pinky and a thumb, and they're different. But there's a place for both of us. In a system I can't quite understand, but I'm glad you exist even though you're different than me. I'm glad you're saying your truth even though it's not my truth. Even though I'll argue with you if it comes down to it, and I'll vote differently, I'm glad you're there. Because the body we're both a part of apparently needs a thumb and a pinky, a left foot and a right foot, in order to find its equilibrium in a way that my little ego can't understand. And isn't it grand that there's so much bigger than me that it doesn't mean I have to stay in this little box of, oh, the wonders I don't have to think. No, think, challenge it. No, that doesn't sound right at all. Why do you say that? But a good enemy will fight back. Well, I say that because of this fact. And then, well, I say this because of this fact. And you both grow. A good enemy to compete is to draw out the best in the partner. And it's the same with a good marriage. One of the things I caution my wife about is not to give in too easily. Because sometimes she'll give up parts of her own truth just because she sees parts of my truth. But that's not how it should work. So I want her to hold on, and we have to find that something that's bigger, that I learn from the best of her, and that has a space. And she learns from the best of me. We have to find something that holds both of those that is bigger. So it's not you win or I win. It's that we have a bigger probability field from respecting both parts. Now, if we are in complete flow with the probability field and the ecology around us, we stop existing as egos. If we identify so much with the environment around us, a tiger wants to eat us, we identify with the tiger eating, and we don't die and don't, we're part of that ecology. And one person I know had a vision of what it's like to be an animal of prey, being hunted, and then the surrender of leaving the body and becoming part of the predator. That part of that animal consciousness is not looking at it like human consciousness. Oh, isn't that terrible? This poor deer got hurt. More that it's the sex of becoming part of another being. And that's just one of many ways of being that it could be. So when we open ourselves to patterns and energies bigger than ourselves, it's like having sex with something divine, something transcendent. And there's nothing more beautiful, there's nothing more healing than being in one of those transcendent states. 5-MeO-DMT, and I have a whole channel on emphasizing, I think everyone should do at least 50 hours of due diligence and safety and precautions before doing psychedelics, because there's so much abuse. We don't know how to respect those terrains in our psyche, in our culture. We don't begin to know what we don't know that we don't know. So there's a good 50 hours of prep. I am not condoning careless use of psychedelics. There's a good 50 hours to study all that can go wrong and why, and learn from other cultures that know a lot more than we do. But 5-MeO-DMT, one of the things that it can help some people connect to. For a few minutes, the first time in their whole life, they've never conceived of that level of consciousness where they feel a part of something bigger than themselves. Period. And just knowing the certainty that they're going to go back into their ego, but that is not the only consciousness that exists. Which means that protecting this at all costs doesn't make sense. That in some ways, it's a tremendous liberation to die and return to a field, to sublimate to something bigger than ourselves. Just as we have the fear of marriage. The part of me that's going to die, oh my God, so important to hold on to me, as opposed to the joy of becoming someone even bigger that is born out of a third energy that can only exist in the synergy of the other, in the synergy of the third energy that is born between two distinct waves, forming a standing wave or a more complex interference pattern. That when two cells join together, and then join together and join together and become part of a larger body, sublimating themselves to be organized, just like stem cells listen to this body. Stem cells, when they're born, they ask the larger body, what role do you want me to play? And a stem role can go into any role. Children being born look to the leaderships around them and say, what do you want me to do? Who do you want me to be? How do you want me to talk? You want me to talk English? I'll learn English. You want me to talk Japanese? I'll learn Japanese. I can talk any way you want. And they become what's needed in that environment. The larger culture being bigger than that individual could grow on their own, just living as a caveman without any human contact out in the wild, not developing language. And the most valuable thing of a culture, of course, is to lead you up to the edge of the culture. To that point where you realize you're not your culture. Your culture is a program that keeps a certain number of people alive in a certain way. With all of its stupidity, all of its limitations, just a program. It's not trying to help you, it's not trying to hurt you, it's just a program. And it's dumb. And it's as willing to murder as it's willing to give life. It's just maintaining its own status quo, which is why it's good to have several cultures to draw on and transcend the myopia of one's culture. All of this is sex. Sex with ourselves, sex with another, sex with a group, sex with the universe. Every time we say no, there's tension and more consciousness. Every time we say yes, there's flow and aliveness and more joy. Every time we become part of something bigger than ourselves, the probability field is increased. The complexity is increased. The grace is increased. We're moving towards the ideal, the divine, of becoming more and more distinct and complex. And there's this greatest terrain, this paradoxical energy, in which we know ourself and we let it go. We know our preference and we enjoy another's. We know our boundary and we open it to something bigger than ourselves, but hold it with something smaller than ourselves. Just a couple of thoughts about sex.